I think we might have to get some more weaponry. They were dead when we got there.
Inside the mind of a teenage mass murderer.
Just begging to be shot.
Damn piece of pumpkin! If you do!
These chilling home movies taken by Dylan Klebold and his co-conspirator Eric Harris gave a window into the violence that was to come.
Imagine that in someone's brain.
Soon after the videos were recorded, Klebold and Harris, wearing black trench coats, opened fire at Columbine High School, killing 13 people, then turning the gun on themselves. 24 others were injured in the massacre. Now, after 10 years of silence, Susan Klebold, the mother at the center of it all, is speaking out for the first time in an O Magazine essay, shedding new light on what could have driven her son to murder. I heard Dylan bound down the stairs and open the front door. All he said was bye. His voice had sounded sharp. I figured he was mad because he'd had to get up early to give someone a lift to class. I had no idea that I had just heard his voice for the last time. Klebold says within hours, a frantic call from her husband would change everything and raise so many heartbreaking questions. How could her son, once a gifted student and Little League baseball player, be responsible for the deaths of so many people? Dylan's participation in the massacre was impossible for me to accept until I began to connect it to his own death. Once I saw his journals, it was clear to me that Dylan entered the school with the intention of dying there. But it is these journals where Dylan wrote about profound alienation, how he was an outcast and hated life, that have the victims' parents asking how the signs could have been missed.
Their son was, he was a murderer, and he turned into a murderer right under their noses.
Brad and Misty Burnell's daughter, Cassie, died that day in the bloodbath that was the school library.
The Harrises and the Klebolds weren't paying attention to their boys, didn't take matters seriously, and weren't firm enough parents. They should have separated Eric and Dylan and forbidden them to see one another.
Susan Klebold's essay provoked a strong reaction from Brian Rohrbaugh as well. He lost his son Daniel.
A couple comments that kind of caught me off guard. She stated that her son was irrational. And I will tell you that I have looked at the evidence, the writings, the basement videos. What they did was not irrational. These two murderers, what they did, their plan, it was coherent and it was cohesive. It was just completely immoral. It was evil.
The Burnells believed the black trench coat, Dylan's depressed mood, a prior arrest for breaking into a van with Eric Harris should have set off an alarm.
I really feel like Mrs. Klebold is focusing very much on her son's suicide and not the horrific homicide that he caused. And for me, I think that she feels like the most tragic thing that happened throughout this was her son's death.
I think they need to be out there talking about those signs that they saw in Dylan and giving other people a heads up what to be looking for.
Signs that include a school paper he wrote about a man in a black trench coat who brutally murdered 9 students. Klebold maintains the school never showed her the paper and she never saw the journals until after the killings. From the writings Dylan left behind, criminal psychologists have concluded that he was depressed and suicidal. When I first saw copied pages of these writings, they broke my heart. I had no inkling of the battle Dylan was waging in his mind.
A lot of these teens, I think, tend to be the alienated kids at school. They're in the social periphery. They're not in the in crowd. Perhaps they're not the athletes. They're not very popular. They're kids who perhaps, are just sort of on the outside looking in. Unfortunately, high school may be where they make their last stand.
From school tragedies in Jonesboro, Arkansas to Virginia Tech, forensic psychologist Dr. N.G. Burrell says one common theme in teen killers is suicide. And a study by the Secret Service backs that up. 78% of school attackers have a history of suicide attempts or suicidal thoughts.
These kids are just wrapped up in their own sort of gloomy life. They don't want to share it necessarily. They don't want to look like they're sick or in need of help. But sure, they entertain ideas of killing themselves or perhaps just wishing that they didn't exist,
And why take the lives of others? What satisfaction does that give them?
Taking their own lives isn't going to make the mark that they'd like. But if they're able to take other people's lives and sort of make this terrible splash at their school, they become infamous.
What changes in behavior should parents look for?
A chronic depression where the kid seems to take no joy in his or her activities, isolation from the family and friends.
The Burnells had their own experience with a child pulling away. Cassie was hanging out with the wrong crowd. They did everything in their power to save her, pulling her out of school and putting her in a new one they thought was safer, Columbine.
We were in such a terrible battle, we finally had to move. When we saw her grades dropping,
I found a stack of letters, and they talked about suicide, alcohol, drugs. They had hand-drawn pictures talking about killing Brad and I. It was just horrific. And so we realized by going through her private room that we had a problem.
we took charge of the situation.
I have always felt sympathy for both of these families. Since the very beginning, I have felt sympathy. You know, a lot of questions remain unanswered, and there's maybe some opportunity to get those answered, but no one would want to be in their shoes. They had a precious little baby. He wasn't destined to be a murderer. He wasn't destined for this.
In her essay, Klebold says she will now spend the rest of her life atoning for her son. I will be haunted by the horror and anguish Dylan caused. I cannot look at a child in a grocery store or on the street without thinking about how my son's schoolmates spent the last moments of their lives. Dylan changed everything I believed about myself, about God, about family, and about love.
You know, I wouldn't want to live the rest of my life knowing that my son had caused such terrible, terrible heartache and tragedy and ruined so many lives. So we do feel sorry for them in that aspect. But to be honest, sometimes, especially reading her essay, I just don't feel very charitable right now.
I'm Andrea Canning for Nightline in New York.